Today we're continuing a series of the best guard releases of 2017. We've already done the Guardians and the Hunters now, and today it's time for the Warriors. Usual disclaimer, this is just my opinion, and depending on which guard you prefer, which playstyle you prefer or whatever, yours may differ. I understand that, that's totally fine. Don't take this as a personal offense against your character, please. I just based this on how the character is released, how their kit feels overall, and what I think is good guard design versus not that good guard design. So, again, just my opinion. I will make a little bit of an exception for the Warriors here, because there was actually just one Warrior release in 2017, but there was one in December of 2016. As I have not made this series in 2016, I think it's more than fair to just pull in that release as well to have a bit of a point of comparison here. Otherwise we'd end up the same as with the Assassins, where we just have one release and then you can't really talk about the best release. We had a release almost every month this year, but because of HRX, because of all the big events coming, and because some big guard releases planned for HRX, we will not have a release in December, so we'll just take last year's. The guards in question are Nike and Cu Chulainn. Now, the thing that both have in common is that they're ability based, and whenever you say any of their names, somebody out there gets triggered about the pronunciation, but that's about all they have in common. Playstyle and kit-wise, they are very different characters, which I think makes this comparison especially interesting. Let's first look at Cu Chulainn here. Now, Cu Chulainn was a bit of a strange release, all things considered. Originally, no one really knew where to place him, if he was rather strong or rather weak, and it took quite a few changes to even put him in a specific place in that regard. So for example, some conversions were changed, some things regarding his rage generation were changed, and some damage values were adjusted. Originally he actually received quite a few buffs, which at the time not everyone thought was necessary. I was among the people who thought that he was actually still kinda decent and people were still trying him out, but as he was a new guard, it seemed that it was kinda mandatory for high-risk to push him a little bit up to the better performing guards. Shortly afterwards, his base shield was also decreased and the shield to level 2, but his rage generation was buffed. It was decreased for non-guard targets, but it was increased for guard targets, meaning it was much easier to actually go berserk in the middle of the teamfight than before. Before, it required a decent amount of planning and strategical play and maybe some minions around you, whereas now it's a lot easier to just get it off through the ultimate. I think this is not necessarily a bad change though, as this means that he's not as minion dependent, but at the same time it's a buff. Because of that, he required another nerf that once again reduced the shield bonus protections and decreased the self-movement buff from Vent Anger. Now the thing is that after his rage gain changes, Cu Chulainn became absurdly strong. And that hasn't really changed since. To this day, Cu Chulainn is one of the strongest, if not the strongest warriors out there. That's obviously always in the eye of the beholder, but I believe that he's definitely a very high tier warrior. Maybe a bit more of a ranked pick than a competitive pick, but either way, a very strong pick. And that's the case after multiple nerfs and him being released approximately half a year ago now. You would think that at this point he would be a little more in line with other guards, but he's really not. So in terms of initial balance, he may have been kind of alright before his first round of buffs, but considering that those buffs were so shortly after his release, it doesn't really matter, it broke him either way afterwards. In terms of his kit, he has some very unique mechanics that are very interesting. We first of all have the first mana-less guard here that converts mana into a little bit of extra health, and therefore has a bit of a unique point in that regard already. But that's not all, he also has a new mechanic as a whole, aside of not using mana. He generates rage, and his abilities and his basic attacks, as well as his allies, help him with that. Now you would think that would be enough as a special feature for a guard, but not so much with Cu Chulainn. He also gets his Berserk from on top of that, giving him a whole new set of abilities. He doesn't have the typical stand swap, he instead has his Chu active all the time while in Berserk, and gets 3 new abilities additionally to that. You achieve the Berserk by reaching a certain level of rage, 85 at the moment, and then you basically can use everything again, everything is cooldown reset and all that kind of jazz. I'm gonna keep it brief when it comes to his abilities here. Most of you should be familiar with most of them because it's a lot to go through otherwise. He has got 2 line damaging abilities in his normal and Berserk form, one with a healing reduction and a minion stun, the other one with a 1-second root. His 2 is kind of a mini physical mystical male, Vent Anger. It's also the only tool you can use to decrease your anger, your rage level when you don't want to go berserk, and in berserk form you constantly have that ticking damage going on, and you also get 5% extra movement speed. His 3rd ability is a leap with a line damage in front of it, or a dash, kind of like Hercules dash in his berserk form, in which it will also push the enemy back. His ultimate is an AoE knockup with a bit of wind up, but then he also has CC immunity in his normal form and in berserk form. It's kind of similar in terms of wind up and damage. It's also an AoE ability, but this time it gives the enemies a 1-second tremble instead. So overall, his kit is loaded with everything from damage to movement speed and ticking damage to a decent amount of CC as well, as long as you're able to control the berserk decently, which is actually not that hard. At the same time, I have to say, in his defense, his kit is very synergistic. The rage gain in combination with the passive, the berserk from the rage gain, the potential to burn out rage with your Vent Anger, and many options to either use it for damaging purposes and risk not going berserk, or doing the opposite depending on how you want to play, what you want to go for in that moment. Often you have to decide if it's worth going berserk in a very brief time frame, and that can be very interesting, though most of the time you want to go berserk anyways. You have all these cooldowns to juggle between the 2 forms as well, something you have to be aware of, though most of the time the cooldown for your berserk ultimate will be down again by the time you transform again, and all these kind of things that can be interesting, as well as playing around his shield. So the synergy is definitely there, but maybe it's just a little bit too much overall for one character. I'm really torn on Cu Chulainn's kit because on one hand I really want to like it because I think it is very nice in terms of what new things it brings to Smite, but on the other hand it's also a kit that is just too much, and especially in the beginning it was too much and the nerfs are coming too slow, so it's kind of a middle ground for me. On the other end of the spectrum we have Nike. Yes, that god still exists. Nike, when she was released, was also on the stronger end and had a pretty easy time dealing with multiple enemies, especially through her ultimate and through a glitch with her tool that allowed her to basically cancel it and reset her attack chain that way over and over and over. The plan of action glitch was fixed relatively quickly, so I wouldn't really factor that in all too much, and her first nerf already came in the first month in December on the 20th, where both her to victory was nerfed. Her passive now required her to reach 250 million kills instead of 200 to achieve goal 2 from the passive. Her ultimate received various nerfs, with the slow being decreased and the buffed slow being decreased, and the health shield being decreased and the buffed health shield being decreased. So quite a lot of nerfs very early on to bring her in line a little more with the rest of the enemies. She was still considered very strong overall and received further nerfs in February, where her to victory was nerfed a little bit. The bonus power was decreased from 8 to 12 to 6 to 10%. Her rend was nerfed in terms of scaling from 50% to 40%, and her ultimate, Sentinel of Zeus, reduced its power scaling by 10% as well. Then she received one last nerf in February, where her bonus movement speed was decreased from 3 to 7 to 2 to 6, and her bonus power from the passive was once again decreased now to 4 to 8%, and her rend received 2 seconds extra cooldown. And that was the last we heard of Nike. Now, seriously, she was very strong in the beginning, but as you can tell here, just by the time span in which the nerfs came in, that was changed rather quickly. Within 2 months, roughly, she was brought in line with the rest of the team and then kinda just fell below them slowly after some more nerfs. But she was definitely not a character that stayed too broken for too long, especially compared to newer releases. Her nerfs just hit the nail right on the head and she didn't really require more than that. While she was still not exactly balanced on release, she was balanced much quicker than it was the case for Cu Chulainn, so she wins in that department. In terms of a kit, her kit's kinda straightforward. It's not too much depth to that, gotta be honest here, but I don't think that in her case that's a bad thing. Similar to what we saw with Hachiman, she only has a few abilities that are in some way unique, while others are just very basic, but it seems to work in her case. Her rend is interesting because the damage can change depending on how many interrupts on the enemy team. If there are a lot of interrupts, then you can never really utilize it. If there are none, then you can smack down enemy enemies quite a lot. You've got that little bit of protection shred built in, a little bit of a disarm built in, all these kind of gimmicky things, which I think are kind of cool. Then her Valiant Leap, her 3, is just a leap with a knockup, very straightforward as well, and what really makes her kit a bit more unique is her 2, her plan of action, because it basically amplifies her other abilities, along with some extra HP 5 by default. I think these amplifications are a very nice approach to add some more depth to a character without making them ridiculously complex through it. With Plan of Actions, you typically want to go for the one or for the ultimate depending on what's up and what you're going for, but that doesn't mean that a quick knock-up in an unexpected situation won't be something that can be very helpful as well. What's really interesting about her ultimate is how the impact of the ult changes between a normal ult and an amplified ult. The normal ult is a nice AoE damaging ability with a decent shield and a fair bit of its slow. If you amp that up with a 2, then the slow becomes way stronger, almost hitting damage in returns, and you also get more of a shield, making you almost unkillable depending on how many people are beating down on you. I personally consider this a very interesting approach to a kit. Because the enemy always has to predict what you're going to amplify next, the outcome can be completely different and you can really throw them off by using it on something else from what they were expecting you to use it on. I feel like even at this point Nike would do well with some more optimization, especially when it comes to her 2 and her 3 in combination. I feel like there could be some more added benefit to that, maybe a cooldown reduction for the ability or something like that. But overall, I think her kit is still very interesting, despite of her not very great performance in the meta at the moment. As much as Cu Chulainn is an enjoyable character to play while he's busted, I do think that Nike is the god that should be crowned the better warrior release or the best warrior release of 2017, even though, if we are 100% accurate, it was end of 2016, as her kit is just something that works a little more natural and is not as bloated and still has enough uniqueness, especially through the passive that I didn't even mention, that helps your entire team. And the interesting thing is that she's one of the best performing guards in ranked because people don't know how to play against her anymore, and she's barely picked up by anyone, but those who pick her up are actually pretty good at her. And with that, thank you guys for watching. Hope you're not upset that I chose the warrior out of 2016 and not the one out of 2017. Hope to see you for the next one tomorrow or the day after, depending on when I get the release out. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. DukeSloth, out. So I actually figured out my demonetization issue and it was my outro. As such, feel free to click any of the links around here right now. There will be new outro music as soon as I find something nice. Until then, as you guys requested, I will do the outro music myself. You're welcome.